Well, good morning. Let me ask you a question. What is the first thing you notice when you meet someone new? Is it their posture? Is it their clothing? How nice their shoes are? Are they wearing a cool hat? You know, the normal stuff. We all are gathering data as individuals all the time. And that information that we gather, just subconsciously, just passively, is going to help us determine how we treat that person in front of us, how we care for that person in front of us. And it's no different when it comes to a large church. Funny story, you guys know Pastor Eric Lamb. His hands are registered deadly weapons in like 17 states. And if you ever see him talking to someone after service and you see him, he's got this hand here, and he's talking to them. Yeah. He's interested, but he also thinks maybe he might have to wreck a fool because now his hands are up, they're out, they're not in his pockets, he's not holding anything. So he's made a decision, whether he realizes it or not. Yeah, maybe you could stand a little further back. Yeah. So he's making those decisions. Now, as I said, when it comes to a church of 13,000 people, you can't just do it passively anymore. You can't do it just one person at a time. You have to be able to gather and analyze that information, that data on a larger level. And now that we have Ministry Platform, it's easier than it's ever been. We're collecting more data than we ever have and better data than we ever have. And we're doing a great job. But there's still more that can be done. Sam in the web team told me a story years ago that about 8 or 9 years ago, he took Pastor Skip into where Tech Ops is now. And the studio used to be a gymnasium, believe it or not. And I remember when they built it. And in that room was just hundreds and hundreds of cassettes like this. If you were born 2000 or later, this is a cassette. And there were 1,032 cassettes in there at that time. And he said, Pastor Skip, this is a prison of biblical teaching. These teachings are incarcerated. Let me liberate these teachings. Let me set them free. And Skip, of course, was like, yeah, let's do it. And so now we have over 3,600 Bible teachings from Pastor Skip and others on our website, which is phenomenal. Did you know that there's a teaching from, Sam, did I get this right, 1982 from the Lakes Apartments on our website? Somebody was forward thinking. It's phenomenal. So, you know, if you have the time today, go maybe listen to that. And so we have the same problem when it comes to data. Our data is trapped. We need to set it free to be able to help us, to gain insights in ministry applications. I think it's ironic, perhaps maybe a little bit of a divine appointment, that the Ministry Platform team like Donna and Delilah are in that same room that the cassettes used to be trapped in. Interesting. And so I have a new role, as Matt kind of said, on the pastoral team as a kind of a liaison between people who work in Ministry Platform and everyone who does frontline, face-to-face kind of ministry to help them see data implications and ministry applications. And this helps us to create useful models so we can take action and improve the way that we do ministry. Now, my official title is Data Analytics and Congregant Engagement Pastor. The term that Neil told me not to use was Nerd Pastor. So you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at NerdPat. No, I'm kidding. And I know what you're probably thinking. That doesn't sound very spiritual, Jason. It's just numbers. I mean, I'm sure the business office is excited, but that doesn't really affect me. But here's the thing. If you think about these accounts, these stories we have in Scripture, Matthew 14, where Jesus feeds the 5,000 with just some loaves and fishes, that Gideon starts with 33,000 men and is dropped down to 300. Starts with 9% of what he had in the beginning. That in Acts, the church goes from about 120 people to over 3,000. Somebody was counting. There's always been a place for numbers and data in our spiritual lives because those numbers, they give us context. They show us the power of the work of God, and it reveals effectiveness and gives us a picture of the task ahead of us. So the goal isn't to be driven by numbers. In fact, the goal is what it's always been, to be Christ-centered, Spirit-led, and data-informed. Okay, so it's going back to our initial example of just meeting someone new from the first time. First of all, we're Christ-centered. How can I communicate God's love to this person? And I'm going to be led by the Spirit, hopefully, in the right way to do that, but I'm also taking in the data. Do they come up to me crying? Do they come up to me white-knuckling their fists? They're clearly upset about something, probably Nate's jeans again, you know, something like that. I see you, Nate, just kidding. But this is the goal for us as a church. Yeah, data has to have a role, but it's not the overarching thing, right? We're not going to let it be our only decision-making process. It just helps to inform the things that we do. So we, back in November, December, Chris Adams and I sat down together in H3, and we pulled up Ministry Platform and like Minority Report. We're like looking through all the stuff, and I'm asking questions. And we don't have official membership here like a lot of churches. And so we have to kind of look differently at our congregation, like who's a part of this congregation, you know? How do we measure involvement? And typically we just say, hey, if you show up and you do things, congratulations, mazel tov, you're part of Calvary. The way that Ministry Platform kind of thinks about this, and so by default, how we think about this now, is that there's 5 categories that I've kind of reduced into 3 just for simplicity's sake. And it's engaged, which is either fully engaged or partially engaged. And that means that they're doing 2 to 3 regular activities. This is stuff like being involved in a connect group. This is stuff like giving on a regular basis. This is serving on a team, checking their kids into Bible Island, going to 30K as they scan their boarding pass. So engage. Then there's observing. They're here, but they're involved in a thing, like they give, or they're part of a small group, but that's all. So they're here, they're kind of engaged, but they're mostly just looking, trying to find their place. And then there's the last category, which is actually 2, but we simplified it, is lapsing and lapsed. So this means there's been no activity in the last either 90 days for lapsing or 180 days for lapsed, okay? So they might be here, but they're just cold chilling, right? Or they've walked out the back door, they've ghosted us, we don't know where they are, we don't know how they're doing, we don't know what's up with their lives at all, okay? And so as you might imagine, we don't want to see people in this last category. We don't want to see them in the lapsed section, okay? And so we said, all right, well, let's look, like what's the state of our congregation right now, okay? We have 21% of our congregation that's engaged, that's great. 18.5% observing and 60.5% lapsing or lapsed, okay? So if you do the quick math, you can see that about 20% of our congregation's doing all the work and 80% of the congregation isn't doing very much or isn't very engaged. And that's not surprising because that's just the 80-20 rule, right? 20% of the people do 80% of the work. So this is normal, which is, by the way, the only time I'm ever going to call Calvary Church normal is in this context, but we want to change this. So, all right, so this is the state of how things are. And, you know, originally when I came to Chris, I was just like, you know, when I worked at Costco, we had a database that was like awesome. It looked horrible. It was all like DOS based and like you didn't have a mouse, you had to tab over to stuff. The screens were green, but it never crashed on us. So that was great. But we knew things. We knew things like 40% of our warehouse was an executive membership and the 60% was the regular membership. And the reason that we wanted people to have the executive membership is they're going to spend on average $250 extra a month just because we gave them 2% back. Right? And we're like, oh, so we know why we do these things. And so I would ask him questions. Well, what about this? What kind of effect does going through LifeTrack have on people in our congregation? And we were like, I don't know, that data's trapped somewhere. We don't have those insights. And so we started to dig. And what we found is this, is that if someone has started LifeTrack in the last 12 months, they didn't even finished LifeTrack. Most of them did. They just started it. That was the only qualifier. This is what the pie chart does now. 78% become engaged, 15% become observing, and 7% become lapsed. We flipped the 80-20. Of those people, 80% of them are heavily invested. That's crazy. Because then we tell people all the time, hey, what's your next step? What's your next step? Maybe you can get baptized. Maybe you could join a connect group. Maybe you should go through LifeTrack. They should go through LifeTrack, okay? Because the things that we do here, like LifeTrack, life small groups, like baptism, we have people do those things not just to keep them busy, but because we think that it's going to help them mature in their faith, continue on their walk, and become reproducing Christians, right? And so we want to see them be engaged. We want to see them financially giving. We want to see them getting baptized, joining small groups, going to theology events, because we know it's going to help them to grow as believers. Business office, you'll like this. These people who started LifeTrack in the last 12 months, they're also 3 times more likely to give. Just a thought. All right, so we started learning these insights, going, oh wow, this is phenomenal. Like, this is really, really great. So let's look into some more data. Let's find some more things. In 2019, if you don't count Freedom Celebration and you don't count Easter, we had 717 decisions for Christ, which is phenomenal, right? If you play the stock market, you want to know like the nitty-gritties of the stocks that you watch, right, Nelson? But there's also like a big like NASDAQ number that you can kind of see the general health of the stock market. This is like the number that should be really easy for us to go, how are we doing? We're doing pretty good. It's pretty phenomenal, considering we didn't include the 2 biggest events of the year for Decisions for Christ. That's pretty great. But we did some digging, and one date kept popping up over and over and over and over again. There was one weekend in 2019 that had more Decisions for Christ than any other weekend the entire year. Which weekend do you think that was? Nick Vujicic's, right, exactly, Nick Vujicic. In fact, we discovered that he made up 1/3 of all Decisions for Christ in 2019. Now, that's amazing. That's great. Now, what's the insight there? We should have Nick come back. Yeah, we should. And it's not really surprising, because like you can have this one guy, half a guy, who can tell this he would say the same thing, don't you get mad at me. In fact, he said it multiple times. This is where they turn on you, right? Okay. If you go back and watch that, it was in June 21st, I think is the date, that weekend services. He has a compelling story. He's a compelling speaker. His life story is amazing. Everyone was coming like, oh, let's see this guy. This is crazy. And you see him do the altar call. He is pushing hard. Okay. I want to see 4 more people. I want to see 10 more people. Okay. We got 60. Let's see 10 more. Like he's like, it's a big tent revival for sure. He's pushing. Now, the question though is, it's a very emotional weekend. It's a very special weekend. So how many of those people stuck around after the big show is over? How many of those people were lapsing or lapsed after that? Any guesses? 20%? Like that? Anybody else? 15? 0%. This is not a rounding error. It was 0 people. When we looked 6 months out, they were all here. Most of them were observing, but some got involved. It was 0 people. That doesn't make any sense. Why would that be the case? It should have been an emotional weekend, and unfortunately, just statistically speaking, we should have seen some people who their seed landed on the rocks, they grew up fast, and then the heat came and the cares of this world, and they passed away and left out the back door and are hanging out at Starbucks now. Like, what did he do? Well, one of the things that he demanded, required that we do, not make sure the check cashed, but that in order for him to come speak, he said, I have these 7 emails that need to get sent starting Monday after someone makes a decision for Christ. and it gets sent one a day for 7 days after that. And so we sent those, and those 7 emails walk people through, well, hey, welcome to the family. Next day, hey, this is why you should be reading your Bible. The next day, hey, this is what prayer is. The next day, hey, you should go to church. This is why church attendance is important. On Thursday, it says, hey, what do you do when you mess up? Which is perfectly timed. When people like are, gung-ho in their faith, and then they make a mistake, they fall back into a sin, and they get this email from Nick, hey, it's okay. Here's how you find forgiveness even when you mess up. Brilliant, right? Church attendance, how to get a counselor, all this stuff. It's great. And so we're like, we should really be doing this. And so we are. We're actually writing that as emails right now. Francesca's helping us out to do all that so that we can follow this well-worn path that we know is actually going to work. So to put it all into final perspective, this is why we care about the numbers. Yes, behind every number there's a name, every hand there's a heart. But we look at these numbers because they show the power of the work of God, reveal effectiveness, and give us a picture for the task ahead. The goal is not to be driven by the numbers. The goal is to be Christ-centered, Spirit-led, and data-informed. Thank you. You're dismissed.